The Metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Supersocial, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Jan, and joining me today for the second time on the podcast, Team O'Reilly. Team, really pleased to have you back on the show. Hope you're well.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be with you.
So, Team has a history of convening conversation that reshaped the computer industry. For those who don't know, he's played a key role in framing and evangelizing terms such as open source software, Web 2.0, the maker movement, government as a platform, and so on and so forth. Team is also the founder, CEO, and chairman of O'Reilly Media and a partner at early-stage venture firm O'Reilly AlphaTech Ventures. Team's book, WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us, explore what technology advances teach us about the future economy and government as its platform. He's a visiting professor in practice of University College London's Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose, where he's researching a new approach to regulating big technology platform by limiting their ability to extract economic rents. Tim, as I said, delighted to have you on the podcast, and I'm going to jump straight to the first question, which I always love to ask every guest on the pod. How do you think about the metaverse today and what the metaverse is, and what has changed over the past year for you from a narrative perspective?
Well, I think probably the most significant change is that the metaverse has largely faded from the narrative of companies like Meta in favor of conversations about AI, in particular generative AI. Now, I do think, in some sense, the metaverse framing was an attempt by some players to kind of tell a story about a virtual reality future. And I think, as I wrote a couple of years ago, I think in many ways that framing overstates the kind of lumpy progress that we have towards something that you could call a metaverse. And because after all, right now, you and I are in a virtual space. And our listeners are also in that, when they hear this, will be in that virtual space, but asynchronously, and the notion that it will all somehow become this synchronous virtual space with, virtual reality avatars just doesn't seem that powerful a concept to me. What I see is a world in which humans are interacting, often like we are with video, and the people who need the avatars and the rest are going to be bots, because they don't have a physical presence. And, that is probably the biggest change, is that we now actually are deep into a world where there's increasingly going to be a set of agents that are going to be able to be partners in conversations like these. And therefore, are they going to be disembodied voices, or are they going to have some kind of embodied virtual presence? So I guess if I were to say, well, how has the shape of the metaverse changed, is the primary focus ought to be, I'm not sure it is yet, but the primary focus ought to be is understanding what kind of presence chatbots, AI, LLMs, and various other kinds of AI agents will have in a communications medium like the ones that we're using right now.
I find it as a really interesting and different point of view, and I want to throw at you something that I'm seeing a lot happening now, which is we have these really relatively large-scale platforms, and I'm saying relatively large-scale because none of them even reached yet 100 million in daily active users. But, platforms like Roblox, for example, 66 million daily active users, primarily young people below age 25, who are really spending hours a day interacting, socializing, communicating, shopping virtual items as a 3D avatar. And for them, it seems to me that human behavior of interacting as an avatar is much more intuitive, organic, and innate to their personalities, and also to the way they engage with technology today. Would you consider the possibility that the world of avatar-enabled internet that are not just AI, but also human-enabled, maybe something that is happening under the surface with a certain population and could become mainstream in the next 10, 20 years? Or do you feel like that's still in the realm of games and kids and young people and may not necessarily evolve with them as they age up?
I would tend towards the latter view, but I wouldn't, you never say never, I mean, the world changes and people's interaction modalities change. But I frankly think that would be a loss rather than a gain if that became the dominant modality. I do see my grandson, playing in those kinds of environments, and he's very comfortable there. But, at the end of the day, we want more real human interaction. And yes, it's better than, just say a text-based interaction. And the immersive world gives kind of a context for, play together. But the issue is there is the play, in some sense. So those kind of immersive worlds are a form of social interaction as entertainment. And I think it's like everything else. We have a tendency to confuse the medium with the actual thing that's going on. And I used to make this argument when I would give talks about publishing, and I would kind of go, this is just a sort of a stupid discussion because, like when ebooks were coming on and there was sort of competition for, traditional publishers, I said, look, this competition is completely different depending on what you do with a book. A book is just, a format, and in fact, the job of a publisher is completely different if you're doing entertainment. The competition for Harry Potter, are everything from comic books to computer games to movies, television. It's entertainment. The fact that one is a book and the other is a movie is irrespective. The job they do is the same. If you are, looking at, a body of knowledge, then a book, a journal, and the internet are really, offering different ways of accessing that information. And I think in a similar way, you go, we looking at what kids do, in a kind of virtual reality environment is a subset of like, well, what are they doing? They're playing. Right? So it is inherently a subset of gaming. Now, does that mean that when they grow up, they will want to have that be their mode of communication? I suspect not. Like if we're having a business interaction or if you're having a, so there, but again, I can imagine it becoming much richer. You kind of go, can you do a better job of shared whiteboarding, for example, or showing, what you're doing, and there may be elements from all that will come into, say, a business communication, but I don't think they're the same thing. I think it's interesting. I remember once heard a talk by Clay Christensen where he talked about a study about that McDonald's had done about milkshakes. And how the thickness of milk, if you understood what job the milkshake did, you would actually have different milkshakes for different time of day. He said, somebody buys a milkshake in the morning, they're likely commuting to work, and they want it to last a long time, so thicker is better. In the afternoon, it's a soccer mom with a bunch of kids, and it's their treat, and the mom wants the kids to get finished with it as quickly as possible so they can get out of there. And I don't know if he was right about that, but the notion that a product does a job, it is, for its users, I think is an important one. And so you have to filter anything you think about this through this idea of, well, what job is it doing and for whom? And it's not one always the same.
No, 100%. I think it's a very thoughtful response you're providing. And, I think the reality is that there is an obvious evolution of the internet in terms of human behavior, in terms of application. The devices are becoming more sophisticated. We're seeing game engines expanding their use cases as well beyond gaming. But I do believe that your grandson that you've mentioned spends time on platforms like Roblox. I do believe, and at least from my experience, building a lot of things on Roblox as well, there is much more than play that is happening. And, there's socialization, connection, communication, definitely. But to your point, does that mean that when they are 25 and 30, they're still going to want to communicate and connect at that level? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe yes, maybe not.
Yeah, but I will also say that for all the time that he spends there, what he would really like is that if he could find a local group of kids to do Dungeons and Dragons in person, he would choose that in an instant. So in some sense, the job that these platforms are doing for him they are substituting for the lack of compatible local kids with whom, he can do what he really wants to do, is this activity. And yes, there's a lot of other things there. He's learning, he's building, but he's also doing that when my daughter was just telling me the other day about these extensive storylines. He's writing out longhand for the characters, for Dungeons and Dragons. So I think it's just a little too facile and too self-serving by the technology industry to imagine that this thing, it's like, okay, we have a product, now we want to basically fit it to people. People will fit it to themselves. And, again, the power of the internet has always been the power to connect beyond what you can do locally. I still remember when Ed Kroll, wrote the whole Internet User's Guide and Catalog in, 1992. One of his selling points for the internet was like, if you're a pencil collector, there's probably no other pencil collectors near you, but you can find a group of pencil collectors online, and that kind of silly example kind of illustrates, the job that these platforms do is to substitute for other forms of human communication and connection.
No, certainly. I definitely subscribe to the worldview that personal connection virtually should not be a replacement for physical connection.
Yeah.
I think the power and the magic has always been in amplifying that and substituting in ways that are not possible.
We're in this primitive metaverse together because we're not in the same physical space.
Yeah, it would have been more fun, just to make it clear. It would have been much more fun for me, and I'm sure for you, to do this conversation in person than doing it virtually. As good as virtually can be, I have no doubt about that. Let's switch gears and talk about taking kind of the conversation a step higher from a bird's eye perspective on what is happening. There are multiple technology development happening at the same time at the moment. For example, game engines are proliferating as more 3D experiences are built, not just games, but all sorts of experiences. Blockchain remains a technology that many proponents believe in as a key to a quote-unquote user-owned internet, whatever that means. And I want to pick your brain because I know you wrote a really interesting piece about that. Generative AI has emerged as a game-changer technology, supposedly, with some arguing that is as big as the internet itself. And so do you see any connection between all of these technologies on a practical level? And how do the emergence of the technologies at such a short time in the last couple of years tell us anything about the way the internet is evolving?
Yeah, I think what I would say, you mentioned three different things. I think we've already talked about my sense of gaming engines and the like being important, but somewhat niche. I think as I've written, about the sort of Web3 concepts and the blockchain, I kind of believe the evidence, at the time I wrote, the evidence was still out, but now a lot of it's in, that this was a lot of hype and there's not a lot of substance to it. And, I have not seen yet the signs of any serious adoption or serious transformation as a result of blockchain technologies. Generative AI and LLMs, on the other hand, I do think are absolutely enormous transformative technologies that are going to have huge impact on society. And yes, potentially on the scale of the original internet or greater, because they are, they're really transformations in the way we interact with knowledge. And I've often talked about what I call the arc of knowledge. And, you think about, we started with, if you think of the arc of human history, it is the arc of communication in some ways. We started out with speech. We were able to sort of convey more information to our peers. And, then we have this incredible discovery of writing, which allowed you to communicate with people who weren't present, either in space or in time. We can still, in some sense, it's only a one-way communication. We can still converse with Homer, or he can converse with us. We can, Sappho can express her passion to us, over the span of thousands of years. That's writing, and then, you have writing becomes more and more widespread. You have, technologies like the printing press, which make it ubiquitous. And then in some sense, the internet is the next transformation of that, first with text. But then you also have more specialized areas. Think about maps. And maps actually teach us something a little bit further about where that stuff goes. You start with like a physical artifact that shows you a picture of the world. And then you get a big bunch of pictures of the world, like and they're all connected, but they're still on paper. And then suddenly you get them digitized, and the early digitized versions are just like the paper versions. And then you start going, well, actually, they can be dynamic. We can say, I want to get from here to there, and you'll get a map just for that dynamic purpose. And you get new affordances for control. And then you get to technologies like, Uber and Lyft, where you literally go, I want a car, it can find you, it knows immediately where to take you. And then you get to self-driving cars, and you can see that more and more that knowledge, which was originally externalized and given to a person, is just incorporated into a device. And now apply that arc of knowledge from maps to what's happening with LLMs. It's like, okay, all of a sudden, before, the internet was a way of taking you to a document that you didn't physically have in your presence, but it was still a document. And now suddenly the document has been read by an agent that is digesting it, and you can converse with. And we're just in the very early stages of that. But that's an utterly transformative experience. We now are going to have entities that, whether they may not be smarter than us, but they're certainly going to be, they're already more knowledgeable than us. And what, there's a lot of bugs to work out, but I think there's also just an amazing set of powerful new interfaces to knowledge that are coming on stream.
Yeah, look, I like to put technology in front of regular internet users. In this case, my wife, I presented her with ChatGPT. I told her, hey, you should go check it out. It's a pretty profound tool. I think you may never think the same again. And she said, okay, cool, let me look at it. And then she started asking it question. And the first reaction, she told me, oh my God, I feel like this is someone I'm talking to, not a search that I'm trying to do on Google. And as you said, we are incredibly early in the generative AI stage. And so I want to ask you, what comes next after generative AI when we think about AI as a category?
Well, I guess the first thing I would distinguish between ChatGPT and generative AI. For generative AI, I tend to think more of tools like Midjourney and DALL-E 3, where you're basically asking it to create something for you. And I that's also true increasingly with ChatGPT. And you look at the kinds of complex interactions that someone like Ethan Mollick is able to generate. He's somebody who thinks a lot about the use of tools like ChatGPT in teaching. And he does some fabulous work. He writes these incredibly long prompts that are really programs, spoken programs that he gives. He says, explain this, then wait for this input, and then, respond this way. Make sure you ask everybody, it's like literally for running a group, he has these descriptions, and you kind of see the formation of and that is the intersection of he's generating, a bot, a specialized bot out of ChatGPT that can do something like be a coach of some kind, and he has, so he has the mentor prompt, the coach prompt, and that's fascinating stuff. And I think we're going to go a lot further with that. So part of what, we are going to start generating, and not just pictures or, slides or things, it's literally going to be generating task-specific sort of AI instances, if you like, that will do something for us, agents. And that's where I do think that starts to intersect with your notion of the metaverse, because, you could have an interaction. Again, I think a lot by analogies, and there's a very powerful thing that happens on the one hand when you get rid of the screen. So you think about the progress from, say, the early insights that, oh, wait, you can write a program that pretends to be a human being, on the, going to a website, i.e. a web scraper or a web spider, right? And it can do the interactions, and it's pretending. But then later, I still remember going up and talking to Amazon in, 2003, 2004, going, why don't you just give us an API for this shit? We're scraping you and we're throwing away most of the data. And if you just gave us, an interface, that would be better. And in fact, that is the progress of what happens. So you start to imagine right now, people are writing these specialized bots to interact with interfaces that the bots could just do much more quickly if they were just talking to each other, right? Using some kind of protocol. And so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in the sense that people are going to figure out how to do specialized things with AI. And those AIs are first going to have these hack interfaces where they're trying to interface with existing systems. And that's, again, where I see a lot of this, the hack is, I have to slow down. I have to have an avatar. I have to have a presence to be in this conversation with the human. But if I can go, when I'm talking to another bot, we're going to do it much more efficiently. We're not going to waste our time pretending that we're people. And so you have to think of this as a much more complex, layered system. And, as in fact the internet is today. It used to be, Tim Berners-Lee built the web as it was kind of like, there's a client, it sends a request to the server fills it back, and then somebody came up with CGI, which is the Common Gateway Interface, where you put a database instead of a single static web page in front of it. And, bit by bit, we built this immense layering of technology, which makes it possible to make much more complex systems. And we're just in the earliest stages of that complexity.
That's fascinating, and it does kind of give a sense of how early we are in the process. And one phenomena that I do echo what you said about ChatGPT, and I found myself interacting with ChatGPT, is the level of depth that you can go. It's essentially almost infinite, or it is infinite, because you can really drill down to the extent that you wish, and to some extent generating very specialized knowledge on a certain topic in a way that really you would have to do manually today and scrap for all sorts of information. That is already quite a paradigm shift for how things are being done. And, I listened to Mark Benioff, founder and CEO of Salesforce, in one of his keynotes recently saying that generative AI is a big evolution, and the next big evolution could be, autonomous agents and so on and so forth. How in your mind autonomous agents, or what could be the next wave of generative AI or AI in general, connect to where we are now, and what is that next phase could mean actually for technology?
Well, I want to start first by saying what's wrong with the current phase, and that is that it's fundamentally parasitic. And I say this in the means that the knowledge that's being sort of recaptured and reformulated is derived from underlying knowledge that was created by humans in the first place. So the first big breakthrough that we should be looking for is the creation of original knowledge by AIs. And I think that will happen. It may be guided by humans, but right now we're in what could be a doom loop for AI, which is there's more and more people generating content with AI, which is now being consumed by AI, and you end up with what they used to call in the days of the early days of Xeroxing, the copy machine effect. Where you copy a copy and you copy the copy, and it gets more and more blurry over time because the reproduction is not perfect. And so I think there are some real risks right now, because the reason, again, humans obviously will create just because they want to create, but they also create because they have to eat somehow, right? And if the creation of work product of various kinds isn't compensated for, and it's just done by AI, then at some point the AIs become this self-sustaining, ecosystem which degrades over time rather than improves. And so, I don't think, like if you look at the issues with, for example, OpenAI training ChatGPT on pirated content, that's really not okay, right? Because ultimately that content was created by somebody who expected to profit from it. And so it's a kind of theft. And I do think that the LLM community needs to come to grips with copyright. It's not at all impossible to do that. If you look at Bard, for example, where Google gives you these suggested, results, one of the options is Google can give you a summary. Well, they have these little down arrows, and it actually shows the documents that were used to generate that summary. But no traffic is being sent to those people who created those documents. So again, that's what I mean by parasitic. The original bargain of the web, and this, of course, is the focus of a lot of the work that I'm doing at UCL about economic rents. The original bargain of the web is we will collect user attention, and we will redirect it to all these people who are creating the content that they're seeking. And suddenly it went, no, we're going to redirect that attention to ourselves and to the content that we produce. And so much of that content is derivative from the work of others who are no longer being compensated by the attention which they can monetize. And there's, in some cases, monetization. Google gives some money to Wikipedia in lieu of the traffic they used to send that Wikipedia could monetize directly. But it's not, I don't think that system is long-term sustainable. And I worry a little bit that unless the creators of large language models understand that these products are part of an ecosystem of value creation and consumption, it's a real market. And if you basically extract all the value because of you're in the position to extract what economists call rents because of your control over some part of the value chain, eventually the system degrades. And that's what happened, for example, to Microsoft in the days when it was dominant on the PC. They basically used their position to extract too much of the value, and the app developers stopped producing new apps. They went somewhere else. They went to the internet, which was free of rents. My colleague Mariana Mazzucato likes to say, when Adam Smith talked about the free market, he didn't mean a market free of government interference. He meant a market free of rents. That is the ability of individual companies to capture the system and keep the flow of trade from being free. So, and so effectively, Google, Amazon, and now, OpenAI are capture points for that make this information market not a free market. And they have to understand that, and they have to say, okay, what do we have to do to make it a free market? Which means that people who are creating things can get compensated for them. And again, I'm not saying that the copyright maximalists have it right. There's a bunch of people who are like, hey, we've been collecting rents, like publishers, we've been collecting rents, and we want to continue to collect rents. And in fact, if you look back at, say, something like Google Book Search, it was actually good for the authors, although they didn't quite get it, because it sent them more traffic and more visibility. I wrote a piece way back in the early days of the internet called "Piracy is Progressive Taxation," It's like if you're super popular already, you'll probably see some reduction through piracy, but most people will actually see an increase because their obscurity is their problem, not people don't know they exist and they don't want their stuff, and so free is better. You start to have visibility. You can and people like Cory Doctorow, the science fiction writer, who'd be a good guest for your show, by the way. Cory, built a reputation online that, with always making his books, free of DRM and so on, that helped actually make him extremely popular. And he thinks a lot about these issues.
One of the, you were mentioning that you're a fan of analogies, so I'm going to use an analogy to describe what I think is some of the issues you described with OpenAI. In a way, OpenAI not providing the right compensation or incentivization for the content that they are using as they scrap the internet to teach and train their LLMs reminds me a bit of the attention economy of how Facebook over many years, including today, has monetized its platform on the content that users have been creating inside the social network. There is a lot of similarities there. Both platforms essentially used access for free content that they have without really providing any incentives or an economic value to content created by other people. Could be a social post on Facebook and could be a piece of essay that someone wrote that ChatGPT is using as it is being trained on its LLM. Does that analogy rhymes? Because I'm trying to figure out how do we explain all these issues to normal people?
Well, first off, I do think that I don't agree that they're entirely analogous because the currency that's being traded, whether it's Google web search or Facebook, is attention. Users' time, and this is again the focus of this paper that I'm just writing right now. So the currency that's being traded is attention. So Google basically finds somebody that they've managed to accumulate billions of users who are saying, I want X. And on the other side of their marketplace are millions of producers saying, I have X, and Google is a switchboard connecting the two. Increasingly, they stop being a switchboard because they go, okay, we will provide our own version of X and we'll give that. And so the people who are on the producer side of that, hey, I am producing X because I want attention from users, are cut out of the picture. And I think the same thing is true on Facebook. You're getting a free service, and what you are paying for that service is your time and attention, which they are then able to monetize through advertising. But there is a trade, which is that traffic, that attention should be directed to the things that you're actually asking for. So in this attention economy, you have to think about there's actually a transaction happening. Like when somebody says, I am trying to find X on Google, they expect to be sent to that, in some ways they expect an answer, and Google may legitimately say, hey, it's better for me to provide the answer than for the user, for them just to get the answer rather than be sent to a website. But the downside of that is forgetting the other side of the ecosystem, because where do those answers come from? Back in the days of Microsoft, this is what shaped my thinking about all this. Microsoft, somebody would have a good idea for an app, and Microsoft would go, oh, that's a great idea, copy it, and the company's out of business. And eventually, the only people who are able to have ideas that they can monetize is Microsoft. And they don't have as many good ideas as the whole market had before. So the system becomes sort of impoverished. And we're in a similar place right now, I think, with Google, for example, where they're kind of going, oh, it's better for the user if we just provide the answer that we can get. And increasingly, AI is going to accelerate that. But they're forgetting the ecosystem view of, okay, where are the incentives for people to keep producing the thing that you are monetizing, and trading for attention? So there's some short-sighted thinking going on. And so that's why I think, we're at O'Reilly, we're trying to model in our AI products, which we're rolling out, because we also are a platform, a multi-sided platform that basically, says to users, we have a big body of knowledge. You ask your questions, we'll give you what you want. And when we do generative AI products like summaries, like translations, like the ability to have a conversation with a book, where you can ask it questions, we consider these derivative works, and we are building systems so that we will be able to compensate the authors under the terms of a contract. Just like right now, we have terms that allow us to say, okay, we're going to have your book and we're going to translate it into Japanese or Spanish or German, and you'll get paid for that too. And in a similar way, we're looking to say, okay, yeah, we're going to make a summary, or we're going to make an audiobook out of your thing, and we're going to have terms by which you still get paid. But I don't see OpenAI doing that. And in fact, I had a conversation back in 2022 with Sam Altman, where he approached me and said, I want to train on O'Reilly books. And I said, yeah, when you can compensate our authors. And as I said earlier, I think it is possible.
Wait, one sec. I want to ask that. So he came to you and wanted to train their LLMs on O'Reilly, and there was no compensation conversation involved, no business model?
No, that's exactly right. And I said, we need a business model. And he said, I'll go away and think about it. And in fact, what it appears from the recent reporting in the Atlantic, that the answer was, let's go find some pirated book sites, that we can train on. And that's the kind of short...
But these are exactly the same problems that due to which I think all this movement around Web3 and blockchain, and it's less about the technology, it's about decisions of business models by key stakeholders in the ecosystem. That is the problem. It's not open, closed. It's business model choices that large companies and powerful stakeholders are making that is hampering innovation, I believe.
Yeah, well, I think it's also just they don't have the right mental model for value creation. One of our principles at O'Reilly that we say all the time is create more value than you capture. And that means create more value, not just for your users, but for everybody in your ecosystem. And I don't think it's just tech, quite honestly. I think that so one way to think about what economists call rent is that it's getting more than your fair share, and because you're in a position of power. Some of the original thinking was done by a guy named David Ricardo back in the early 19th century, and he had these arguments with his friend Malthus about these corn laws that were being introduced in Britain, and Malthus was arguing for these tariffs that would basically raise the price of corn, which would make British agriculture, British farmers willing to, would make them more money. And Ricardo said, no, it won't make them any more money because they're tenant farmers. They're working on the land of somebody, and the landowners, the rentiers, will collect the higher prices in the form of higher rents. And that, of course, turns out to be the case all through the economy. So in some sense, if you look at the history of the web, it's the creation first of this enormous ecosystem value where Google, for example, was enabling traffic, where Amazon was enabling merchants. And then you look at Amazon is probably the biggest example where, their advertising business is entirely zero sum. It's entirely rent collection. You do a search for something, and here's the search result, and they have an ad for the exact same thing that comes first. Somebody clicks on the ad, the merchant pays an extra, 70 cents or whatever it is, which used to be their profit, and now is Amazon's profit. And, the questions really, I think, and I think these things are ultimately extractive business models, and they're short-sighted. And they're not that dissimilar to, I guess when I come back to this whole question of the risks of AI, the biggest risk that I see is not that AI will become sentient and on its own. It's that AI will become subservient, just like everything else is, to our current mental model of the market, in which a company, which is, as a science fiction writer Charlie Strauss says, simply a slow AI, it has been tasked with, this function, this objective function to maximize shareholder value and profit, right? And so we're going to do the same thing with AI, just much faster. But that wrong objective function, I wrote a piece, about, they talk about the alignment problem. Will AI be aligned with human values? And I go, yeah, it will be aligned with human values. The problem is it will be aligned with the wrong human values. And the wrong human value is, we got to make money from this. And, we try to put, to ameliorate this a little bit with ESG type goals that get added on, but they're not primary. The primary goal is still exactly what Nick Bostrom, foretold in his, his work, where he said, you'll tell this, AI to make paper clips, and it'll eventually decide that humans are in the way. That's what Purdue Pharma did when it was trying to maximize profits from OxyContin. It's like, dude, let's tell the regulators this stuff is not addictive, because that will help maximize profits. And then you externalize all the risks onto society. And so I guess I just I think that it raises a bunch of issues around how to think about, AI regulation that are, I think, pretty different than where I think, unfortunately, that I think regulators are going. Because right now, the big guys are saying, regulate us in ways that will keep out any competition, and so effectively that will actually make the problem worse. I'm actually kind of a fan, despite the risks, of open source AI, smaller models, because I do think that decentralized markets are more generative of new ideas, are more generative of new possibilities than big centralized markets.
Let's switch gears and talk about that in the context of a couple of things pretty quickly. I know we're getting close to time, so maybe if you have a succinct answer, and we can always continue the conversation at some other point. But how does government, we're talking about regulation, what do you think should be the government approach as they seek to embrace effectively a technology like AI, and making sure that we're not only protecting the risks, but also we are not preventing from innovation and the float of ideas?
I think the biggest thing that I recommend is that they push for disclosure. I wrote a piece called "You Can't Regulate What You Don't Understand." And I think that the biggest thing that regulators should be doing is saying, tell us more about what you're doing. And in particular, tell us regularly and repeatedly. That's one of the things that if you look at financial disclosures, they got to give you the same numbers every year, every quarter. And, if you look at the kind of disclosure that we get from AI companies, they'll put out a system card with a new AI model, and we say we did a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Here's what we think. But it's not repeatable. You don't get an update. They don't, so I would be looking for all kinds of operating metrics. Like, okay, we know that they're working to reduce the hallucination rate, but they don't report what the hallucination rate is. We know that they're trying to reduce misinformation. We don't know what the misinformation rate is. Or this issue about copyright. Okay, well, how much copyrighted content is being surfaced? There's all kinds of things that the companies, I would guarantee you, are measuring, but they're not required to tell anyone. It's a lot like, and disclosure doesn't solve everything. And we still have financial fraud. We still have companies that are, but that's partly because the disclosures are weak and they could be stronger. Again, we wrote a paper out of my group at UCL a couple of years ago about why the reporting of big tech is really useless, because they don't really have a model for. Here you have these businesses that have billions of users, And they say, well, it's all just advertising, so it's all one big business. So there's no disaggregation that says, okay, well, how is Google Maps monetized? What are you measuring? What do you, so there's a whole thing for operational disclosures, even in the current context that we're missing, but even more in this context of AI. So I would push on, what are you doing? What data were you trained on? All the things that come out after the fact in, these lawsuits, for example, like the stuff that's coming out now about copyright is as a result of lawsuits. And if government were to say, no, you have to disclose this stuff right from the get-go, we'd have a much, I think, a much better chance of getting the outcomes we want.
Tim, another piece of your work is being an investor. You have good insights and good entry point into early stage companies because of the work you've done, because of the work you do with O'Reilly Media, the work you do with your venture fund. How do you bridge the gap, especially in today's world where NFTs is a big trend, Metaverse is a trend, generative AI is a trend, right? And obviously you have a clear point of view, I believe, on what these trends mean. But how do you bridge the gap between noise and buzzwords and between finding investment opportunities that you understand and that you believe are relevant in this emerging space?
Well, first off, I don't do that much active investing anymore. But I do think that the way that you should approach these investment spaces is to ask, is basically you look for, I look for what I think of as very large long-term trends, first off. And is this thing aligned with a long-term trend, which is supporting it? So for example, I made some investments in space technologies quite a long while ago, companies like Planet, because I went, space, it's a thing, and there's going to be more of a thing, and you have some beliefs about the future. I made investments in healthcare. You go, hey, population's getting older, healthcare is, and then you have, new laws. Anyway, there's all kinds of things you can look at that give you a macro framing for what trends you believe in. And, sometimes those are sparked by new technology. But I ultimately also look for, okay, is there a real business here? And I think one of the things that went really wrong with Web3, and probably will go wrong with generative AI, but less so because capital is no longer so cheap, right? We have much higher interest rates, which means there's other alternatives for where you can get a return on capital. And so that makes it people be a little less like we're stepping up to the roulette table. Because I do think like Web3 is a great example of nobody asked, okay, how does this turn into a business? And it's funny because we got the wrong idea, I think, for many, for like we had a lost decade in investment in a lot of ways, where companies got enormous valuations on hype, and then they come crashing back down to earth. And sometimes that's good. It's kind of my friend Bill Janeway calls it Schumpeterian waste, where you do get innovations that might not otherwise have come about. But you look at something like Uber and Lyft, as great examples, way overhyped because they were funded by cheap capital, which allowed them to offer their services below actual cost. And then once the cheap capital dried up, all of a sudden, these services are not cheaper than the old taxis. They're at least as expensive, and yes, they're a bit more convenient. But they managed to, in the meantime, decimate the competition and build these big centralized monopolies. And we would have been much better off if capital had not been so cheap. That VCs had not been able to put billions of dollars into Uber, crush everything else. And, we would have had something, much more like the early evolution of the web, which was sort of off to the side before the dotcom, boom. And you had a lot of experimentation. We went, from, and what's sort of interesting to me is most of the great companies don't actually take a ton of investment. There's a few that do. I mean, you look at anything with physical manufacturing, Tesla or, SpaceX, obviously there's a lot of actual capital. There's actual capital involved in the build out of data centers and web services today. But relatively speaking, like Google raised only $35 million, or maybe it was 37. It was not a lot of money. It wasn't $6 billion for what's effectively a software product, which is what Uber is, right? So we've had this period where cheap capital created all these distortions, which meant that people were able to get into a dominant position without actually, earning it. As I wrote in one piece, the market didn't pick the winners; the VCs picked the winners.
That's a good point to almost wrap up. Tim, what are you most excited about for the next 12 months?
I guess there's a personal thing, which is I'm super excited about the work that my wife is doing, Jen Palka. She has a book out recently called Recoding America, which doesn't really do it justice because it's not really a tech book. It's really about why government policies typically fail to achieve their objectives. It's really about getting implementation a seat at the table. And so, for example, one of the areas she's really focused on right now is climate change. We allocated this huge sum of money through the Inflation Reduction Act to try to make a dent in climate change, to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy. And what's going to stop it? Potentially local building codes, permitting for transmission lines, permitting for, so all these implementation details that nobody thought about, that nobody has really tackled. And she kind of tells a story in her book about, government programs gone wrong because nobody, the people who designed the policy never thought about the implementation. And I think that notion is super powerful, and I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about this new theory we're developing of what we're calling algorithmic attention rents, and in general, kind of getting this notion of rents back into the dialogue, particularly about big tech. I think that I'm also super excited about, but I am also super excited just about the fact that, we're all being handed a new superpower, in the form of AI. And I guess this goes back to your investment question also, which is the things that have always excited me as an investor are things that have the potential to make the world a better place. That's really the only thing that we should be investing in. It's not like the investment is, this is a great opportunity for you to make some money. I go, who gives a damn? I want to know, is it going to make people's lives better? And we have a new set of tools that potentially could make people's lives way better. So I'm super excited about the work we're doing at O'Reilly. How do we apply AI to helping people learn new skills? Because, how can we turn this into an assistive technology rather than a replacement for people? That's just a super powerful, battle worth having.
I'm going to expand on that as we wrap up and say that I think many people should invest their time and invest their money, and also what people are building should all be really targeted at making the world a better place and providing impact for people's lives, especially in the world we live in today with so much uncertainty, both technologically, but also everything else that is going on around us. Team, thank you so much for your incredible insights and coming on the show and sharing with us all of your thoughts. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the Metaverse.